welcome to the Indeed Knowledge Product video interviews. Today we have Kai Brand-Jacobsen, the president of the Romanian Peace Institute. Kai is also the director of peace operations and a senior expert in the field of evaluation. Welcome, Kai.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
We're going to start this interview by asking you a very curious question, which a lot of people, I'm sure, ask you, why and how you got into the field of evaluation.
It is an interesting question, and I should be completely honest that the field I got into originally 30 years ago was peacebuilding, working with how do we address difficult and complex conflicts and crisis and find effective solutions that meet the legitimate needs and interests of everyone involved. And I was working directly in peacebuilding in communities and countries that were affected by war and armed conflict, from former Yugoslavia to Afghanistan, Colombia, and many others. And I'll be completely honest with you, for the first decade of my work as a professional practitioner on the ground, I was not interested in evaluation. So for me at that time, evaluation was something that seemed to be imposed as a requirement from donors. It was something that was done to prove to donors what had happened in a project. That was my understanding then. Gradually, as I was working in the field and in peacebuilding, dealing with armed conflict, also increasingly dealing with issues of radicalization and violent extremism around the world, in Sri Lanka, in Iraq, Israel, Palestine, Northern Ireland, and elsewhere, the lens through which I began to see this was, if I'm doing this work on issues that are affecting people's lives, and I want to do it well, in a field where we saw so often that a lot of our efforts and initiatives, in fact, sometimes weren't working, either not succeeding at all or achieving less than we hoped for out of single initiatives, but also out of our collective efforts to address these areas and these challenges, often having little or no real impact whatsoever on the critical issues, the root causes, the dynamics and drivers of conflict. And gradually what grew was the recognition and understanding that evaluation is actually an instrument first and foremost for us as practitioners. That evaluation is an area of the field and a skill set and practice which engages with the questions of why and how things are working or not working, and to really understand what works, what doesn't work, why does it, and not to stay at the headline level where you simply say that something succeeds or doesn't, or works or doesn't, but really dives in and understands how is it we do things that can contribute to making it succeed or not. And a parallel that I often draw is with medicine. And for example, in medicine, you don't ask whether open heart surgery is something good to do or not to do. First, you need to look at what's the context in which you do it. Is it the right thing to do in that context? But then you really look at how is it actually done? Because that how is what's critical, both for whether someone lives or dies, whether someone survives in surgery, and the how is critical, whether we're speaking about peace building or in the CVE field, for whether our programs, our policies, our strategies, our initiatives actually succeed and contribute to addressing both the goals we have for them and, even more importantly, contribute to addressing the situation that we're trying to work on, or don't.
Mm-hmm. But this is such a valuable insight because you started as a practitioner. And my question right now would be perfectly leading from your answer. What would be the reconciliation in a way between the practitioner's need for actionable insights and then the field's rigorous complexity. So what would be the middle ground between user-friendly but also methodologically rigorous evaluation reports?
I think it's a brilliant question. For me, this is one of the most exciting areas of where our field is improving at the moment and where our field needs to improve. You mentioned rigorously complex, and what I would actually suggest is it's important to realize that evaluation has been a pioneering field for most of the last decades. Back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, when early work was first being done in the field, there was actually no field. So there weren't degrees in evaluation, there weren't training programs, it wasn't even a word that was consistently used or understood. At that point, people who engaged in it really were pioneers, and they were coming often from different backgrounds. Some of them were coming from professional practitioner backgrounds, working in social work, working in education, working in medicine. Many of them also came from academic backgrounds, and all of them brought very important contributions to the field, helping to understand what types of questions we needed to ask, helping to understand how could we actually get answers to those questions. But for much of the last 30 years, a significant portion of the field has come from people who have often had academic backgrounds and may have not had professional competency or experience either in the fields they were addressing or in fact in how to do evaluation. And so sometimes they're developed almost this idea in the field that you do an evaluation and the end result is a report. And also this idea sometimes that the reports needed to seem complex in order to prove the expertise of the evaluator. And we were looking at the wrong points. The point of an evaluation is to achieve meaningful change. Not just the point of the initiatives in the field, but the evaluation. And you need to start an evaluation by asking the question of why. What are we doing it for? How do we want to use the learning and the results from the evaluation? And when you do that, you're putting the stakeholders, you're putting the practitioners, you're putting the community and those that are engaged in this work at the very focus and center of it. What we then need to look at is how do we support agencies, organizations, practitioners in the field and policymakers to harvest the learning and the results of evaluation. And one thing that's very interesting is that many of the best evaluators in the field have realized you don't actually do that just at the end. You do that in the way you do the evaluation. So what we're seeing is a much more advanced, a much better part of the field is actually designing evaluations where you have deep engagement with the practitioners right from the start. You don't have this myth and this complete fairy tale of the expert evaluator or the academic expert, the one who comes in, has all the knowledge and tells people what works and doesn't work, and the one who holds all the power in designing the approach, designing the methodology, looking at the questions, and then making sense of what comes out from the evaluation. Instead, I would suggest that professional evaluators and the professional end of the field recognizes that it is the practitioners who are working in their context. And that means they both have deep knowledge and understanding of aspects, but sometimes we can be blind to certain aspects because we're working in it. But it's only by engaging with those who are day-to-day hands-on working with the topics that you can really understand some of the questions and some of what needs to come out of it.
Exactly.
Engaging with the practitioners and the professionals, engaging with the stakeholders, with the communities that are being affected, involved, or that the programs and efforts are done towards in terms of what's being evaluated is also vital. And here we're talking about engaging from the beginning with communities, stakeholders, and practitioners, both in decisions for when evaluation should be done, in looking at the scope of evaluations. What are we trying to understand? What do we need to ask to understand that? How do we need to engage with those involved to understand it? Also then, when you bring out that information, when you draw out data, having practitioners and communities make sense of. Because if I'm coming as an external evaluator, as a so-called expert or academic from a university that sometimes will be a deep expert on the field. We've also seen a lot of evaluations where the people who come have no background on the field. They often don't even know what questions to ask, and also they often don't know how to make sense of the information they get. But if you actually have participatory-based approaches and stakeholder engagement-based approaches, where you can have conversations on that evidence, and you can get those who are involved to bring out the meaning and bring out findings. One, a lot of the learning that needs to be harvested is then done in real time, directly by the stakeholders and by the professionals involved. The second then is, once you have all of that, and you're looking at how do you bring that knowledge forward, reports are almost never the best, most appropriate, or most professional way of doing it. So yes, it can be important to have reports, and then we should look at how do we format those reports, how do we language them, how do we bring out the information in ways that are hands-on, clear, accessible, but we have to go further. So for example, what you'll see a lot of professional evaluators doing is we workshop the results with the practitioners, with the stakeholders, with the agencies involved. I often encourage, when doing an evaluation, to workshop results not only with the organization we've done it with, but with other organizations that are working on those topics, with local government authorities, with national institutions, because another thing that's critical is we need to bring forward the learning to benefit the field, not just have that within a single agency or organization. Beyond workshopping, what we will do when we're doing an evaluation is create a change management team with the organization or agencies we're working with. This is created at the beginning of the process. They're involved at every step of the way, making sense of it. But then as we complete the evaluation, what we're also doing is identifying the key recommendations or the key areas that they wish to address to affect change. And for our institution as an organization, an evaluation will often be the starting point. And we won't do it only to do the evaluation, but we do it as part of a change management process where we will often then be contracted to develop guidelines, toolkits, operational procedures and protocols, sometimes even looking at terms of reference for positions. We will train colleagues in how to work with and implement the new approaches, which they themselves will have been involved in developing and designing. And then we will help them to practice it, to actually simulate and to implement it. And in some cases, we've often done 1 to 2 years of accompaniment after the completion of evaluation, where our role is to support the agency in implementing change. A very long answer to an important question, but the point is, it's an incredibly exciting field. There are so many ways we can bring forward the results and learning. The one last one that I would just mention as well is an idea that has come out of the Indeed project from our workshops recently with practitioners in Bremen and Madrid, is that we should also create a repository where all of these evaluations are gathered together. And then if you support that with AI, you could enable agencies, practitioners, experts to harvest results, harvest learnings from these different evaluations in a very user-friendly and appropriate way, so that we can learn not only from the evaluations we're involved in, but also from past evaluations that can help support and improve what we're doing in the field.
Definitely, I'm very curious to see where the field of artificial intelligence will kind of be honed in towards helping evaluators and the field of evaluation in general. But also I find it super insightful, like what you just said right now, because from a first glance, I guess from a practitioner that just starts into the field of evaluation, it seems like the entire onus is on the evaluator. Like the evaluator have to do this and that and comply, and then at the end of the evaluation tick, you know, we've done the evaluation, because usually there's, exactly like you said, there's this perspective that the evaluation is done at the end of the initiative or the policy or whatever you're trying to evaluate. And it's great that you were talking so much about the history of it, so where it started, and then the whole process, because what I hear is empowerment in a way. And I wanted to ask you, in the field of PCV, how do you see you can empower people doing the evaluation, empower your stakeholders into the process to kind of own up to the results of the evaluation?
There's so many important parts of that question, and if I can try and just take them one by one. On the first, looking at the role of the evaluator. I think like in many fields that were developing the 50s, 60s, and 70s, but still with the legacy of past centuries and approaches to expertise, role of professionals and knowledge, and you can think of, the way that the priest may have been perceived, or the government, or the academic. Very often you were talking about top-down models, or what Paulo Freire called a banking approach, where some had the expertise and others had to simply receive it. I think it is fantastic to see the way the field is developing now, movements for the decolonization of evaluation, feminist approaches to evaluation, and what you also mentioned, empowerment, social justice, transformative approaches, where we are repositioning power, and we're understanding that an evaluator, and I would actually suggest that this is entirely true also when looking at professional and competent evaluations, because it wasn't just that the old top-down expert coming in, almost always an academic, almost always someone from the global north. I wouldn't just suggest that that's a different model of power. I would also suggest it was an incompetent approach to evaluation, because there was so much arrogance, there was so much ignorance, people thinking that their title or their position gave them access to knowledge and expertise, and simply so frequently not even being aware of the most important things that were happening. So one, it's not only changing an understanding of the role of the evaluator, where there's some fantastic work done in the field that looks at facilitative evaluation, and understanding that the evaluator is a facilitator of a process where the ownership is not meant to be simply with the evaluator. And the evaluation is not done so that someone can write an academic article or get published and get more credit and more profit for them. But that the evaluation and the evaluator are there to serve a purpose, which first and foremost has a responsibility to the communities that are being impacted. And so you also have the evolution of the field of looking at democratic evaluation and, as I mentioned, social justice evaluation. So if we take this back to the preventing and countering violent extremism field and de-radicalization, we're talking about some of the deepest challenges and issues we're facing in our world today. We're seeing polarization increasing. We're seeing literally, when you include also the wars that happened following September 11th, trillions of dollars of our money, citizens, taxpayers, government expenditure that has gone into addressing this field. And most of it hasn't worked. And a lot of it has not only not worked, but has actually made the situation worse.
Right.
Everywhere from the illegal invasions of Iraq and Afghanistan to sometimes national strategies like PREVENT or policing operations, rather than addressing the root causes, finding solutions to the problem, improving relations between communities, and decreasing radicalization and extremism, sometimes it's the very things that we have done which have fueled divisions, fueled loss of trust, and been abusive themselves, and impinged upon democracy and impinged upon the rights of citizens. Within this, the idea of empowerment in evaluation. So evaluation isn't something which is done that just checks initiatives. Evaluation is an instrument also of achieving the overall positive goals we should be working for. Healthier democracy, quality of life for citizens, reduction of extremism. And you have to talk about and see what are the goals. In that, it's the ones who are citizens and who are living with these issues, whose rights need to be respected, and who we need to increase ownership and awareness. And it is the practitioners that are doing the work who need to be right at the center, and to have respect for them, as we have respect for doctors, as we have or should have respect for teachers in schools. These are the people doing the job on the front line. And in the field of radicalization and violent extremism and everything around that, you're talking about community workers, you're talking about sometimes also frequently law enforcement officials and all the spectrum around that, social workers, non-governmental organizations, teachers and educators. And these are people who are faced with sometimes dealing with hard situations, difficult situations, and evaluation should be implemented in such a way that it helps them to have the tools, the knowledge, and the understanding to do their work better and to achieve positive goals that we should have at the forefront of the field. So then how we do that is in part through the evaluation process, but one which needs to be respect-based, one which needs to engage authentically with understanding the conditions and the context which people are in. And then there are so many tools and ways you can build empowerment into that, including authentic listening to communities, engaging practitioners in the communities in identifying, as I mentioned before, what should be the scope of the evaluation, what do we want to understand, having processes where you also bring findings back to these communities or even engage them in the findings and where they make sense of them. And this is where, if I could just for a moment, I want to get back to the idea of looking at the role of the evaluator, because what we're beginning to introduce is, in fact, you don't just need an evaluator. And what we're beginning to see in a lot of approaches to evaluation, particularly coming out of Asia, particularly coming out of social and community work-based fields in the United States, is quite often you will actually engage both professionals, practitioners from the agencies involved to be part of the evaluation team, and also people from the community. And then they're engaged all through the way, and it also helps to have better social context and cultural competency. You're having people come from the different backgrounds, professional competency, and being able to make sense of and understand from the needs of the community and from stakeholders. And we haven't named evidence-based evaluation yet. This is the whole frame in which the entire INDEED project is taking place. But one thing that evidence-based evaluation brings forward so clearly is the need to engage with these three pillars, these three components of one, best available evidence, both internal and external. And when you're speaking about evaluation, what that actually means for those doing the evaluation is best available evidence of how to do evaluations well, how to plan them, how to prepare them, how to implement them, the approaches, the methodologies, how to do utilization. So if we want to implement an evaluation by an evidence-based evaluation standard, then in doing the evaluation, we need to look at engaging with the best evidence on what works and what doesn't work in the evaluation field, and in making evaluation results utilizable, usable. Stakeholder and community context and needs and engagement, and authentic engagement with the stakeholders, and professional judgment and expertise, and really working with the professionals. So it hasn't been brought forward that much in the field. We often will use terms of empowerment or participatory evaluation. But I would suggest that, in fact, evidence-based evaluation, to be evidence-based evaluation, has to engage directly with these issues and has to be empowerment and participatory in its approach and methodology.
This is music to my ears, because you're talking about so many things, and now I have so many thoughts that I would want to discuss with you. But I think you said a key word that really sparked something in my brain, because I've been really interested in transformative evaluation. And this is looking at the role of power and kind of trying to work for human rights with evidence-based evaluation, trying to uncover injustices. And power is central to this, right? Who does the evaluation? Who pays for the evaluation to be done? Who is chosen to be part of the evaluation, part of the stakeholder group? So my question is, have you seen a rise in the practice in evidence-based evaluation of introducing gender-differentiated data? And why do you think this rise is happening? How do you think the practice is advancing? Do you think it's because the donor requirements have changed, or we are changing and we are seeing an increased need in actually looking deeper at the data that we're collecting?
I love that you brought these different components together, looking at transformative evaluation, looking at issues of power, and then the issues of gender and engaging with gender in every aspect of how an evaluation process is done, and I would also say in every aspect of the field. Now, to bring this back to what we're looking at within the Indeed project, one of the things that has been a very exciting area of practice for us has been a component led by our partners in the organization Vicese, where they've brought forward a lens that we've been calling GELSA, gender, ethical, legal, and societal aspects. And the idea that both within the PCVE field, when we're doing initiatives, and in the evaluative practice of the field, we need to include these at every step of the way. In gender, we're talking about authentic engagement with all the levels and dimensions of gender that are involved, both in initiatives in the field and in evaluation. So that is way beyond simply looking at counting how many women, how many men, how many genders do you have. It means also being aware of, when you're starting right from the beginning, which should be the starting point of every initiative and every evaluation, understanding the context. What are the different gender dimensions of the experiences of the context that gives rise to radicalization? Remember, radicalization and extremism are not the drivers, they are the results, they're the phenomena. So there are things that are creating the conditions in which we have radicalization and extremism. What are the different gender dimensions of those? And then you can also look at gendered impacts and components of the drivers. You can look at also the gender dynamics and dimensions around organizations and movements, around ideologies, around narratives, and we have to understand all of that. And also then, when doing the evaluation, to look at how do initiatives take this into account. So just to give one example, which many of us in the PCV field know, we have been focusing overwhelmingly on the masculine or male engagement in violence and extremism. We have often not been looking at much either at also female engagement and participation, or the ways in which we almost take it for granted about masculine involvement, and not looking at different possible male roles and what are the crises and the issues that can be affecting men for why they're becoming involved. So not just taking it for granted that men may be more violent or may be more predominant within movements, but realizing and trying to understand what are the factors which give rise to that. Then also you need to look at personnel, you need to look at how we're engaging with issues, we need to look at the different gendered experience of, it can be police interventions, technologies and methods that are used, training programs, workshops. Look at the content. So for example, when we are providing training, do we always use he as the one to describe, or do we also have more gender inclusive, and not only for just men and women, but for all genders? When we're using pictures, when we're presenting roles of and visuals of communities, are they gender inclusive? Are they also socially and culturally inclusive? So to give an example, which I borrow from Finnish partners that we've worked with when they've been looking at education to address radicalization and violent extremism in the Finnish context, what they spoke to is that the Finnish population is increasingly diverse, with people coming from different cultures, different societal backgrounds. But in the classroom, and I don't know the evidence for this or if it's factually correct to the percentage, but what they were saying was at least 80% of the teachers will be white, female, middle class, and from, many generations of Finnish descent. Many people, so that's for the teaching staff. Many people in the classroom may be Finns of diverse background, and they don't see themselves represented in those that are teaching to them. Now, if the people coming to teach to you about polarization, about extremism, come from one cultural context, one, economic background, one societal, cultural context, that also affects their ability sometimes to reach others. Now, let's say the evaluator comes from the same background. They'll often simply be completely unaware of that and not even know the elements that might be excluded or lost because the initiatives are not being done in a way that is socially and culturally inclusive. And you spoke about also transformation and power. It is, I would propose, at least from my own experience, vital to understand that every aspect of evaluation is about power.
Right.
You mentioned also that it's often coming from donors, or is it imposed from donors? So one, evaluation can affect whether things are funded or not. That's power. When you decide what questions to ask, when you decide what you look at and what you don't look at, what you ask and what you don't ask. And I would also say that a lot of evaluators aren't even aware that they're deciding that or doing that because they're operating within a set way, but that's power. When you decide who gets to make sense of the answers that have been received or the information that has been gathered, that's power. Every aspect of evaluation is the exercise of power. But we often haven't even been conscious or aware of it as such. We haven't put it forward as such. So there's been the implicit exercise of power in which expert evaluators, donors, and others have been empowered. And often, to look at another part of the evaluation process and the relationship, we'll go to professionals, we'll go to communities to ask questions, hold focus groups, do interviews, get information from surveys. We extract, take from them. Often, there's then no further communication. They may not even see the evaluation report, but they certainly are not respected. They're not engaged with agency and with power. And that is something that should be changed in evaluation practice. Transformative evaluation, I would suggest, is just making competent what should be understood about evaluation from the beginning. Again, evaluation is not meant to use taxpayers' or donors' money to produce a report so that the evaluator becomes more famous or publishes another article. Evaluation is not meant to be done so that you check a list and you have something to now show the donor this was done. Evaluation is a vital instrument for understanding and knowledge creation and development of, is what we're doing working or not working? Is it helping or not helping? And how do we have to do it? So evaluation should, in its fundament, be a transformative practice to help us learn, help us understand, help us see where there are things that aren't working that need to be changed, see where there are things that aren't working and go the step further, understand why or how, and also the same for what is working, and help us see how to take the steps to improve that.
Well, actually, that made me think, do you know that saying art for the sake of art, to not pressure, to put pressure on the art. And now I was thinking evaluation for the sake of evaluation for the sake of advancing the field, of bettering our societies, of actually helping for the sake of helping the community you're trying to help, right? Instead of helping your project achieve the results and then hopefully achieve impact in the future, which we're not sure about what we're trying to achieve, right? So I think there's a dynamic here that culturally maybe we have to advance towards. But also what was really interesting from everything you were saying was that we have on one side a very robust understanding of evaluation, evidence-based evaluation, a very robust framework as well, baseline. But also on the other side, we have a lot of things lacking in it, right? You're just talking about so many of them right now. So I was thinking that what do you think are the future advancements in the field of evidence-based evaluation? What do you see as the new emerging maybe outlooks, methodologies?
Well, for the first part of that, I would say that I think actually both of those are legitimate goals. So if we're looking at evaluation for contributing to impact objectives, for contributing to improving, addressing root causes in our society, improving positive goals we might set, like having healthy relations between diverse communities, having trust in governance, absolutely, that should be a fundament of the contribution and the identity and self-understanding of evaluation. And then evaluation addressing the evaluant, the specific project, initiative, and helping to understand, are we achieving project goals? Both of those are legitimate. It's about also making that connection that the project should be contributing to these societal objectives and impacts as well. In terms of some of where we've been in evaluation and then where we're going, I would suggest conservatively 90% of evaluation as it's been done in past decades is what you might put in the area of bad practice. Often results are not replicable, often methodologies are highly questionable, even when we speak about things like the gold standards that were often put forward for evaluation and having randomized control trials. When those have been investigated, you've seen so many flaws in how they've been implemented, in the questions that were being asked, in the methodology of interpretation and understanding, where evaluation has often been defined more by the ignorance it reveals if you really challenge it, or by the failure of its approach, than being a functional tool that actually helps us. With that said, there has also been so much brilliant work in evaluation over the last decades. And again, always important to remember, a lot of this was pioneering, people trying to find how to do it. I think when you look at where we're going, one, we need to reintroduce what we understand by evaluation. Because if we continue with the current practice where we think that evaluation is done because a donor requires it and evaluation is imposed from above, it won't connect to the field. I was really appreciative when we were having a workshop with colleagues in Madrid recently, where one of the participants from Greece, when we were discussing the aspect of we need to build a culture of evaluation in the field, actually said, we already have a culture of evaluation. The challenge is it's a bad culture. We have a culture of evaluation where there is the implicit, stealing of power, where there is bad practice of producing ridiculous, extensive reports, where the reports can be quite valuable, but the way in which it's done virtually guarantees that its destination is the dustbin, that it will never be read by a practitioner, it will never reach the field, and it is not the practitioner's fault, it's not the field's fault, it's because of how unbelievably poorly written, how convoluted, how all of those shortcomings, many of them are. You do need to prove the rigor of method, you do need to have, quality presentation of information. That doesn't mean you need to make it so convoluted that no one can understand it, or hide findings in ways that they're not utilizable. So I think rooting and relocating the center and the purpose of the field in contributing to improving practice and improving policy and helping us to understand, having conversations with practitioners and with the field about how important this is to our work so that it comes from us, so that rather than people rejecting and holding back from it or being skeptical of it, we actually see this as an aid, as an instrument. Also, like in many areas of practice, we're seeing the evolution of collaborative approaches, of participant-based approaches, of methodologies that are actually more effective. Exciting work in the field of developmental evaluation. That's one of my favorite areas of practice, where the facilitated evaluative approach you're doing harvests real-time learning. So to give one example, we were working with a major agency which was engaging in dialogue workshops with participants. We knew that those activities were part of the process in building and developmental evaluation. We would both do ex-ante evaluation with them to prep and train and explore their approach and test what they were going to do in the dialogues before they even did it. So looking at their theories, their logistical, their preparation, their skills for it. So we tested all that before, and then also immediately after they did the dialogues, we did case review, and we built in learning with them, so that, as one example, a dialogue practitioner who had faced a very difficult moment in that dialogue with the participants had a supportive space to reflect upon it after, had eureka moments of realizing this is what I could have done, this is what I could have done, and was able to implement it immediately after, leading to real-time harvesting of learning and improvement in practice. Also, what we mentioned before, doing a repository of evaluations so that we gather the information together. More robust approaches to collaborative learning as a field. We have currently in Europe some brilliant steps by RAN. We have the EU Knowledge Hub developing. Where there are gaps are often at the local and national levels. So greater use of multi-stakeholder collaborative spaces where agencies come together, do joint analysis, do joint planning, so that you're getting psychologists, social workers, teachers, law enforcement, community representatives, civic work, everyone together, collaborative evaluations, joint evaluations, and making stronger the link between evaluation and training and evidence-based policy and practice. So the link between evaluation and training is like in medicine, tens and tens of thousands of operations are done all around the world every year, every day. You harvest that knowledge, you harvest what can be learned, and a lot of things are lost, but it's amazing as a field to bring together most of it. And then you bring that into the training in universities, you bring that into the professional training, you bring that into journals, you bring it into conferences, you bring it into practice and into the field. Other is evidence-based policy. I think citizens and practitioners and all of us would be aghast, if not traumatized, to realize how often the development of policy and strategy has nothing to do with evidence, has nothing to do with any input from practitioners, systemically doesn't engage with communities, and we're doing things that we know don't work. And this is one of the interesting things. One thing that I say often is 90% of everything that will go wrong in an initiative is entirely obvious before it even starts. If you do ex-ante evaluation, and if you do even the most minimal, rigorous testing that sometimes can be done within some hours, and you have real professionals and practitioners that have expertise and knowledge of the field looking at it, or the communities that it will engage with looking at it, you can see easily 90% of everything that will go wrong in an initiative. The same is true of policies. And so we've had a development and a practice over the last decades where policymakers that are making decisions about how to address these issues often do so in a vacuum. They may not have previous experience, they may not have knowledge on it, they may be listening only to one sector, the security sector, or lobbyists or others. We can strengthen that connection between the actual people who really work with the field and the communities, our citizens, and build up understanding with policymakers, build up evidence-based, so that we begin to see more policies that actually contribute to real impact.
Absolutely. Kai, this has been such an interesting conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for all your answers, and thank you for everything that you're doing in this field, because it seems like you have the answers and the future answers to most of our problems. So,
what I would say is not myself. All I'm doing is, as someone who loves the field and is working, seeing what is developing in the field. What is developing is because of tens of thousands of colleagues, practitioners, people who are authentically engaging with honesty, with humility, with doing our best every day, often with little resources and a lot to do. But it isn't about, and it isn't from me, it's that there's a real field and there's amazing work being done in it by so many people.
I really love this idea of humility, because you see, I think personally, I see the most work and the most impactful work in the world being done by very simple people that just try to make things better and don't advertise it in a way of, oh, I'm changing the world. And you can really see the difference, because we were talking about the way that evaluators sometimes are arrogant about, I'm doing the evaluation, I'm owning this project.
And I don't think it's intentional, and actually I would say that most evaluators I know do come at it from the right space. I think one of the challenges are when people come as academics with also no professional background in evaluation, and then believe that being academics, they're experts and should be doing this when they have no background in it. Most, not all, evaluators I know come at it from the right space. However, where I would very much agree is that you do have amazing work being done daily by police officers, by community workers, by teachers, by social workers, by people engaging in this work directly in our context, on the ground, all over the world, and including also people that are trying to understand and learn how we do it better, sometimes without ever having known or heard the word evaluation, and by people that are trying to see how evaluation can be a really helpful tool in this. And that is also part of what inspires me, that this work is happening around the world. I think one thing that I appreciate also with the Indeed project, but also with so many initiatives that are happening now, is we're also recognizing the importance of coming together and of support. And there is an effort that's coming in increasing conversations about creating a global community of practice that can help to connect people that are doing this work. There are brilliant evaluation associations in different parts of the world, and global, European, there's ones in Africa and Asia, all over. But for those working in the CVE, de-radicalization field and evaluation, there isn't at the moment a space which can just connect and help to facilitate sharing of information, sharing of tools, asking colleagues for help. That also is one of the exciting current new frontiers that we're developing.
It's really great to see this field flowering right now, and people, and even young people, getting very interested in into getting into evaluation. So it's great. Thank you, Kai. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Mulțumesc.